Hello, and welcome to Predict and Protect, Enhancing Your Cybersecurity Program. So today's webinar is sponsored by BitSite and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this fireside chat style conversation. Now, before we get to today's great content, we have a few housekeeping items that are going to help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. So not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we're going to discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues. But if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to an ebook, which is a critical guide to closing your exposure management gaps. There are also some links labeled ATM in there, which stands for Actual Tech Media, so you can find some other resources there. I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link with the details there. Now, finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenter, who I'm going to introduce in a minute. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So after the event is over, we'll look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. Okay, with all that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to today's fantastic session. So our session today is going to be a fireside chat about anticipating and mitigating threats. So mastering these skills not only strengthens your organization's defenses, but also improves data reporting and strategic planning. And we're also going to learn how leveraging correlated security data and managing external attack surfaces can transform your defensive strategies from reactive to proactive. So the reason BitSite is a great organization to have this conversation with is that the company is a cyber risk management leader, and they transform how companies manage exposure, performance, and risk for themselves and for their third parties. So companies rely on BitSite to prioritize their cybersecurity investments, build greater trust within their ecosystem, and reduce their chances of financial loss. So BitSite is built on over a decade of technological innovation, and its integrated solutions deliver value across enterprise security performance, digital supply chains, cyber insurance, and data analysis. So this is going to be a fireside chat style conversation, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Brian Mulligan, VP of Product Security Performance Management at BitSite. Brian, welcome. Great to have you here.
Hey, Scott. Great to be here.
You know, Brian, before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about your career route to BitSite?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I'm the VP of Product Management for our ratings and data engine platform at BitSite. I did in the past work in identity access management. So I've been at BitSite about 6 years, working primarily on helping organizations use BitSite and our data to improve their own security governance and their own attack surface management practices. Before that, I was working in cybersecurity as a product manager at IBM.
Awesome. That's great. So let's get right into it. So, what kinds of exposures can BitSite help an organization manage?
BitSite takes an external view of an organization, and we can gather a remarkable amount of information, a remarkable amount of exposure from that outside-in view. We think about our exposure into 4 different categories. We have compromised systems. So this is evidence we have of an organization running software that you don't want to be running, botnet infections, grayware, machine software that's going to be trying to do something nefarious in your system. We have a large category of we call diligence, which is really around security configuration. So this are the things that we can see from the outside set up and configured in accordance with security best practices. So those include things like email security protocols, SPF and DKIM. It includes a lot of software version evaluation for server software for desktop and mobile software. It includes evaluation of coding practices in mobile applications available in mobile app stores. It also includes things like firewall configurations and so forth, which broadly cover a wide range of exposures. The other two categories are user behavior. So that's evidence that people within the organization are doing things that are increasing cyber risk around, like file sharing, for example, and security incidents. And so security incidents is evidence, of reports of breaches or ransomware attacks, things of that nature that happen within an organization. So all of those exposures broadly are covered by the platform.
Okay. All right. Excellent. It sounds pretty comprehensive. So how can a company move from reactive to proactive in their exposure management practices?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, there's no shortage of tools which will produce lists of exposures, and then you have this prioritization problem of, what are the things that we only have so many cycles, so many people, and so much time to fix things. And so it becomes this tricky problem of, well, we want to make sure we spend our time on the highest priority things. One of the things that BitSight can do to help with that is, because we're taking an external in view, we're taking the same view that somebody trying to attack you would take, broadly speaking. We have access to the same kinds of information that someone sitting outside an organization would have access to if they were trying to attack the organization. And understanding what that looks like helps you move from reactive to proactive. If you understand what your digital footprint and what your external digital footprint looks like, where you have assets, what kind of assets those are, what they're running, what kind of software it's running, where they're located, what business units they're connected to, who in the organization is connected to those assets, having that all well understood goes a long way to putting you in a good position for when there is something happening. When something does happen, you can respond to it quickly, and you're not kind of in this reactive panic mode. And so what BitSight does is it helps you find all of those assets. It's like somebody looking over your shoulder from the outside, trying to find, every IP address, every domain, every host name that you have externally, and then to provide all that data, which I mentioned earlier, all that exposure data on those assets. And so just the act of identifying those assets as part of your attack surface management program can help you become more proactive. In addition, we can do the same level of discovery for your vendor ecosystem. So our attack surface management doesn't end at kind of your perimeter or the collection of assets that you're using in the cloud, for example, but looks and is able to identify your vendor relationships, and then what are the key service providers that you're relying upon. And we have their external attack surfaces. And so you can use BitSight to understand what that looks like in aggregate. How secure is your supply chain? You can use that to engage with your supply chain directly to reduce exposure. And we have the same level of fidelity on all of those companies too. So you're not talking in the abstract about a relationship. You're talking about like a particular machine with a particular problem, and you can work to resolve that as well. And that helps you become more proactive for when there is an incident. You can be resilient and not just purely reactive.
Gotcha. Yeah. So let's drill into that, that external, view. So what are some of the benefits of using an external tool for exposure management versus primarily internal tools?
Yeah, internal tools are great and they're necessary. You need to know what you have. The trick with internal tools, though, is they generally work well on the things that you point them at. So if you have blind spots as it relates to parts of your infrastructure, if you're part of a large organization with different people procuring IT, you've got application teams or business units who develop their own applications and deploy their own cloud infrastructure. You've got marketing teams who deploy websites for different purposes. That's all kind of expanding your digital attack surface, and governing all of it is hard. I don't meet a lot of people who have a lot of faith in their asset management system. Most people don't feel that the view they have from something like a CMD is especially comprehensive. It's a good starting point, but isn't especially comprehensive. And so the internal tools are broadly held back by that kind of visibility, whereas an external tool a lot of the value you can get is just from the view of the asset discovery. So we are going to use, we have a technology called the graph of internet assets that looks at relationships from all different kinds of observables on internet facing assets. We use all those relationships to figure out which ones belong to a particular organization, and you can use that to help make sure that you have everything covered in your asset inventory, that your internal tools are deployed in the right places, and that you understand where you have exposures or the possibility for exposure externally.
Yeah, and that made me think of another thing, which is, obviously there are those benefits of the external tool that you can't get from internal only, but as a vendor versus like an attacker's view, do you guys have an advantage in that? Are you connected to any of the internal tools to make sure that there's nothing that you're missing in the scans? To look for vulnerabilities in tools that might not just pop up, that are sort of obfuscated or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Integration is key to all of this. So we think it's important to have bidirectional integration. So that there's integrations that we have that take the data that we're finding on assets and the disposition of those assets and syncing it into tools like SIMs, like ticketing systems, like analytics platforms, where that data, where people take action on that data, where your team is already working and taking information from other tools, our data can play there nicely. Similarly, to your point about identifying places where we should scan, we have the ability to synchronize assets with, for example, a cloud service provider. So you can connect your AWS instance or your Microsoft Azure instance to BitSight. We will pull from there your external footprint and make sure that our data collection coverage has all of those assets. We'll identify some of those assets on our own as well. But by doing that kind of integration, you allow us to have a more comprehensive view. You allow yourselves to have a more comprehensive view. A lot of people like that from a governance perspective. So if you're running a large organization, you've got many teams with many Amazon accounts. And by syncing your Amazon accounts in mass to BitSight, we can keep an eye on the external footprint of those accounts and make sure that everything is being deployed with the security controls that you prescribe.
Awesome. Thanks. So what kind of delta is there between what customers think that they're protecting and what your tool reveals for them?
We get people all the time. I mean, even in our POs, like people come on board, they have some discussions with us, they decide they want to try the tool. In that first session, we have some great stories where people say, oh, what's this? I didn't think I had any assets in India. Like I have all this, like you're showing me 100 assets in India and I don't have any people in India. I didn't think. I certainly didn't think I had any technology in India. And then they come back on the next call. They say, we dug into this and it turns out we acquired a company, 6 months ago, and they had a data center in India they didn't disclose during the diligence process. And we found that, thanks to this visibility, we brought that into our controls. We're going to do what we need to do to get that, into our management process. But that kind of thing happens a lot. I mean, we see things that one part of the tool shows the cloud hosting provider for various assets. And so we'll have people who will be a big Amazon shop and they pull up our dashboard and there's, 150 Microsoft Azure IPs, and they'll say, well, what are those doing? Who's responsible for those? And so that we give a lot of, I think people get a lot of value just off the initial, kind of the initial summarization before you even dig into the details around that kind of asset discovery.
Interesting. Do you see a lot of that as well with SaaS applications where, say the marketing department is signed up for, 16 services that the IT department is unaware of? Is that a common thing that you guys uncover as well?
Yeah, we do some of that. We identify, in our vendor identification, we can identify SaaS platforms and other types of vendors using a variety of sort of qualitative methods. And that's a good starting point. Like you can say, okay, well, BitSight thinks there's some relationship here, and you can go and figure out, against a procurement list or another source of internal list, like, do we actually have this vendor? In a lot of those cases, we're able to point you directly to the asset where we found that relationship. So you can say, okay, well, we think you have this vendor because we found this asset here. And that can be a more productive conversation. It can also the ability to do that vendor identification also helps us look through your supply chain more deeply. So if you have a portfolio of vendors you're looking at in BitSight for exposure reduction, we can also identify their vendors. And so you can look at aggregate statistics for not just your third parties, like your vendors, but their vendors as well. Because you may have a situation where you don't have any dependency on Amazon directly, like your Microsoft shop and everything is on Azure. And so you're thinking we don't have any AWS dependency, but your 3 of your top 10 vendors may be entirely on AWS. And so if there's an AWS problem, you actually have more exposure to it than you might have thought, given your direct exposure is minimal, but the kind of fourth party exposure is significant. And that's all
Gotcha.
that kind of thing that we can highlight for you in the tool.
That's a new term to me, fourth party. I like that.
Yeah. It's, turtles all
yeah,
the way down. You get those vendors have vendors too, and so the more sophisticated programs are getting it. They talk about nth party, nth party security, and so that's really interesting.
interesting. Yeah. Okay. So as far as that data goes, how does BitSight gather that data to give that outsider view?
We have a wide variety of data collection depending on the type of things. Much of it we gather ourselves. Some of it we partner to gather. There's 2 real big categories of data. One we call who data. So that is all the IPs, domains, host names, and what organization they belong to. So we have I mentioned this earlier, we have a technology platform called the Graph of Internet Assets. It looks through publicly available registration information, DNS, certificates, BGP, other sources of kind of who, like asset data telemetry, and forms relationships about which assets belong to which companies. We then we have a team, like a large team of human curators who go over that automated work to help improve it. And what the benefit of that is it helps us train our model to get better over time. So our automation gets better progressively because of the work of our human taggers. And so the result is a high quality, like low false positive view of an infrastructure for customers. Because one thing we hear frequently is that we don't want another tool that's just going to dump things that we have to go and sort through. And so we want to make sure that the infrastructure we're providing is very high quality. We do that through our Graph of Internet Assets. The other big data collection platform is called Groma, and that's our internet scanner. So we scan all of the IPv4 space. We scan hundreds of millions of host names on a regular basis, and we collect a lot of that intelligence information, a lot of that telemetry about how things are configured, what kind of protocols are available, what's the security in the web applications we see there, and so forth. That's an active data collection technique. We also rely on a number of passive techniques where we're sort of out there listening, and that's how we detect the compromised system. So the malware infections and the botnets. We intercept their communication. We're able to tell from the IP addresses what organizations they belong to, and we track it down that way. So there is like really a diverse set of information collection that allows us to paint this holistic picture of exposure within an organization.
Yeah, in kind of drilling into that, in order to sort of help us understand what BitSight is doing, do BitSight's capabilities map to the capabilities of tools that are commonly used by attackers like Nmap or Metasploit or tools like that?
Yeah, I'd say we know from some of these recent high-profile security events that attackers now have kind of internet scale databases of where different kinds of software are deployed. We know this because as soon as there's a new vulnerability to disclose, all of the machines with that software on the internet are being exploited in a very short time. So you have to have had that map kind of already, and that's essentially a map that we're building and we're maintaining. And the same thing for like Nmap. So we're not doing an Nmap scan on the entire world, but it's sort of a lighter weight approach that's similar to look for the kinds of things that may be exposed and aggregated. It's also a good starting point. We have people who use our information as a starting point for their pen test teams. So it's kind of like what you might see this as the first step, the first kind of reconnaissance step in a pen test, and a lot of that is kind of digested and served up for you within the BitSight platform.
Gotcha. And before we get to the next question, we do have a poll question for everybody. So I do want to put that up and give everybody an opportunity to answer that. But so the question is, how important is external attack surface management to your overall exposure management program? And then it's not important, somewhat important, neutral, moderately important, and very important. So I'm going to leave that poll up here for a bit and let everybody have a chance to respond to that. And while we leave that poll going, Brian, just most companies today only directly control a small portion of the IT infrastructure that they rely upon for the business. And given that much of the tech belongs to vendors and partners, getting back to that fourth party conversation, how does that shape CISO's view on exposure?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are increasingly having conversations with CISOs that are changing from how they were 3 years ago, where the CISOs are feeling more responsible for the security of especially their top tier vendors, the people who are running in the critical functions of their business. The CISOs want to be able to put a tighter lens on the security of those vendors to make sure that if they minimize the chance of something happening. And to date, this is largely done through kind of questionnaire processes, asking vendors to submit different kinds of information, proof of a pen test, fill out security control questionnaires, and so forth. Increasingly, people want to have a more data-driven lens into this exposure. So for many providers, which assets are most important, which services your team, your technology is connected to. So you really want to keep an eye on those assets specifically and treat those assets, even though they belong to somebody else, kind of in the same level of care that you would treat your own perimeter. And so we're seeing a lot of people interested in doing that within our platform. The other kind of third party piece that's come on recently as it relates to exposure is this major security event response. The next time there's a vulnerability in a widely an exploitable vulnerability in a widely deployed piece of software, the first task, like as soon as that hits the Wall Street Journal or the business news, the kind of company leadership comes and says, where are we exposed? And so that's a two-part question. One is, where are we exposed in our own organization? And people are usually, pretty well positioned to answer that. There's vulnerability management tools. There are asset inventories. You can kind of see what software you're running. There's tools like BitSight, which can provide a nice double check on all of that to make sure that we're not seeing any additional assets. But the beauty of BitSight is you can then do that same level of check across your vendor ecosystem. And with BitSight, you can take action on it in bulk. So you can say, okay, there's this new vulnerability. It's in Microsoft Outlook. I don't want to pick on Microsoft. We had a few of those in the last couple of years. And so you want to know who is using Outlook. And ultimately what you want to know is who is patched, who's not patched. Who should I be worried about? So within BitSight, you can look across all of your vendors. You can see the assets with Outlook. You can see the disposition as to whether we think they're patched or not. And then you can in bulk send them a question that says, are you aware that this asset is using Microsoft Outlook and is vulnerable, or is it vulnerable, and are you taking action on this? And you can get that back in bulk, and you can look at it across all of your vendors to say, okay, we asked 80 people this, 60 of them said they're aware of it and it's patched already, and the other 20 said they're aware of it and they're working on the patch. Or maybe 10 of them said they're aware of it and they're working the patch, and 10 of it said, hey, let me check into this. I don't know what this is. But that's a huge improvement over the process before this, where you basically had to ask every vendor. You're going to send some sort of questionnaire to every vendor with no evidence, like no concrete asset that you're asking about. A lot of them aren't going to have the technology. A lot of them aren't going to respond. And so having the data for that outreach, we find has a much higher success rate and is a powerful new capability that we're giving to CISOs to engage with their supply chain.
Oh, that is a really cool tool. Because the next thing that I was going to ask you about was, how do you take action on exposures outside of your direct control? And that's clearly a great way that the tool provides to do that. Are there any other things that you can do with the tool when the exposure is outside of your own network or your own data estate?
Yeah, you can. There's different kinds. Like the general philosophy that we use is you reach out to the the company you're working with, and you give them access to all of the data. So in the case that I just mentioned in the response to a major security event, you're giving them a very focused slice of the data. Here is this machine. Here's what we think is up with it. Like, can you please comment on that? But we gather all the data that I mentioned, and we create KPIs. So we have we call risk vector grades. So looking at different parts of security, looking at open ports, looking at web application security, and we grade those with letter grades. We then aggregate all those up into the BitSight rating. And so the rating is a 3-digit number. The higher the rating, the better the security performance. If you're looking at a vendor and you're trying to say, okay, I don't, what's going on with the security posture of this vendor, you can say, all right, I have some questions about this, and send them access to the complete tool. So they get, at no cost to them, access to BitSight to go in and look at whatever you find interesting. So a lot of organizations will have policies like tier 1 vendors must have an A in these risk factors. These are our core security controls. We require our tier 1 vendor to have an A. You can invite them right into the platform. They can come in, they can see not just what their grades are in each of those areas, but all of the findings. This machine was observed with this problem on this date. Level information directly in the platform. They can take action. They can communicate back to the people who invited them. And what we see a lot is there's this nice ecosystem that develops. So, you get one reach out from BitSight, but then another customer of ours reaches out to engage, and people start to realize that, there are a lot of folks monitoring them using this tool, and that the tool can be a powerful way to communicate their security. So people will start doing this work to help respond to their customers, but then take the same work they're doing and use it to help tell their story internally about their security performance. Like, great, we had this metric. This is a metric that all of our customers are measuring us on. We have plans to improve on this metric, and here's where they are, and here's how we'll track it over time. And people are using that to tell stories to their boards of directors and their other stakeholders that care about security performance.
So I imagine a lot of your customers are using this tool in their vendor selection process as well, not just responding to incidents and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. So we have a full, the tool is used throughout the third-party risk management lifecycle. So people use it in vendor selection and onboarding. They use it in continuous monitoring. We do support a full questionnaire vendor risk management workflow outside of all of the security data as well. And so people use the tool heavily for that.
I wonder if you can walk us through some examples of cases where your customers have used that capability to identify security holes in their supplier infrastructure, and what happened when they notified their suppliers.
Yeah, there are a lot of good stories here. So sometimes the supplier's first reaction is like, wait a minute, what? What is this data? But they, when you get to the right person, we have a whole team that works with those folks. So we have a whole team that works just supporting the folks who've been given access to BitSight from their from their customers, to make sure they understand what the data are showing, and they have a full ability to take action on it. And I think it makes for a very productive relationship. So you send out to your vendor, you say, we have these specific questions. The vendor looks at it. Oftentimes they come back and say, okay, yeah, that is an open RDP port, and we just, it's amazing we haven't been ransomed. We're going to close that right away, and thank you for making us aware of this. And I think our third party risk customer feels gratified that the problem they were worried about is fixed. And I think in a lot of cases the recipient ends up appreciating the value of a tool like BitSight.
Okay, and we have a couple more questions, but before we get to those, I just wanted to share the results of this survey, and it looks like, not surprising for an audience that's attending an event on enhancing your cybersecurity program. People are leaning toward the feeling that external attack surface management is very important, or there's nobody who said it's not important. It's leaning toward the top half there of the responses, but that's great to see. Okay, so next question I want to get into is, what's the connection between exposure management and data-driven security governance?
Yeah, I've talked a bit about this already, but the idea is the way we think about it is you have this foundation of data. So you have to go out and gather the data I talked about before, the who data, like what assets belong to which organizations. Then the what data, what kind of malware do we see? What kind of configurations do we see? And those are all useful for a lot of these exposure management workflows. We want to make sure that everything we have that you can see is patched up to date and the configured according to best practices and is not running malware, that kind of thing. But once you have that data set, you have this great raw material in order to help run a governance practice. So it's hard to run a governance practice just based on the exposure data itself. But by taking that data, we can calculate these KPIs and these metrics, like risk factor grades and the bit site rating, that can be used to have a governance program, can be used as a metric that can assess the overall performance of the security program. And the reason that you need a metric is because you want to be able to look and see that you're measuring something that's connected to real world events. And so we do a lot of data science research to make sure that the method we have for calculating the rating is connected to the likelihood of a bad security outcome, things like breaches and ransomware attacks. And so we develop each of these individual risk vectors, and then we combine them into the rating, strictly measuring like what is the correlation to ransomware attacks, what is the correlation to breaches, what is the correlation to security incidents. And so we know that in aggregate of the over 1 million companies that we rate every day, companies with lower ratings have a higher chance of a bad outcome than higher ratings. So once you have a KPI like that, it makes sense to use it as part of your governance program. So to say, okay, here, we want to make sure we're going to differentiate with security. We want to measure that using the bit site rating. Here's our rating today. You can provide rich context on that from a governance perspective. So you can do things like here's the distribution of ratings for companies that are similar to us. Here's our industry, or here's our industry inside of our country. And here's where we stand. We're in the 70th percentile. We're going to make these investments over the next year, and we expect that will move us from the 70th percentile to the 90th percentile, which is where we want to be, because we want to make it clear to our customers that we're differentiating ourselves based on security, and we want to reduce the likelihood that we have some business impacting security event. And because the rating is correlated to outcomes, and because you have all of the data needed to take action on it, it becomes a very powerful performance or governance metric that can help you connect the high level storytelling and messaging to stakeholders to the actual action you can take in the platform to achieve change and achieve improvement.
Okay. All right. Excellent. You talked a bit about how, BitSite can help an organization communicate about security to key stakeholders. On that topic, what are some of the pitfalls of doing so, and what are the most effective ways to do that communication?
Yeah, I think the pitfalls that we see sometimes, especially around exposure tools, is every security tool produces lots of metrics, and some of those metrics are interesting to people who are security professionals, and who have kind of the context necessary to make sense of them. The mean time to remediate is one of my favorite ones. That's a great metric. It's important. You can measure it a lot of different ways, but it's hard for somebody who's not a security professional to know like what is a good mean time to remediate. If you're trending it over time, you understand that trending down is better than trending up, but like what level is good?
Right.
There's a lot of counting metrics. People count the number of CVSS 9 or above vulnerabilities that they've patched. Those metrics are useful for a security audience. When you get beyond the security audience, I had a CISO of a big global company tell me, he's like, I talked to the board, and the first couple of times I went and I presented to the board, I just got this blank look. And then I realized their view of the technology is sort of like, this is a laptop and this is a mobile phone. Like everything else, at the deeper technical level is just like, that doesn't register. So he changed the reporting around. He presented the BitSite rating. He presented performance of the company relative to the peer group, performance of the company relative to their top 10 competitors. So like a leaderboard, every quarter, leaderboard of the top 10 competitors. And then a list of actions that he was taking to kind of continue the performance, or continue to improve their performance. And it drew out a lot better discussion from the board members. People could ask questions about why particular companies were in different areas on the chart. It could ask questions about like what was a good level for them to target. We enable those sort of conversations because of the context in the rating that you don't have in a lot of exposure metrics. And so I think the pitfall around using exposure metrics is, you can also get from our platform the number of vendors with a particular vulnerability, and that's interesting for your vendor management program, but probably not interested for a kind of a stakeholder or governance reporting function.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay, great. Hey, we've got a couple of questions that have come in from the audience here. Let's switch over to some of those. Really interesting question here from somebody else named tastefully named Scott, who's asking, are cyber insurance companies using tools such as BitSight for determining risks of onboarding new customers? And if so, what kinds of risks concerns are they looking for?
Yeah, great question. We have an entire business application focused on cyber insurers. They focus on kind of three things with us. One is looking at the time of underwriting, what the posture looks like for organizations. They do a lot of their own research around like what are the specific misconfigurations that are present in companies that they get claims from afterwards. And a lot of the things they find are ones you might expect, like I used this example earlier, but open RDP ports. If you have an open RDP port, like the insurers will tell you you're going to have ransomware. Like it's a very high correlation, and so there are cases like that where the insurer is like, we're not going to engage with you, or it's going to be very expensive to engage with you until we can resolve these problems. There are other cases where there's not like a glaring exposure problem, but the performance looks slow. A lot of the configurations that we see or the patching is slow. There's a lot of outdated desktop systems, and that can influence the pricing or availability of the premiums. That's the first use case. The second thing they do with us is look at their portfolios. So the policies they've already written, trying to make sure they understand where the risk is in the portfolios. And the way they reduce that risk, or one way they do a lot of things. So one of the ways they can reduce that risk as it relates to BitSight is by giving those companies access to BitSight. So similar to how you can give your customer, you can give your vendor access to BitSight, an insurance company can give their customers access to BitSight. And so they want their customers using BitSight to improve their ratings, to identify where they have exposures and to fix that, because they believe that will ultimately lower the risk of a claim. And a lot of people, after it's a similar introduction, people get introduced to BitSight that way. They see the value of the tool and the value of doing something externally. There are also, just thinking about other constituencies using BitSight, we have a growing number of investors using BitSight. Investors are interested in corporate governance broadly, and cyber risk is part of corporate governance. And this is a compelling way because of the correlation to bad outcomes to assess corporate governance. We have a partnership with Glass Lewis, who is a proxy advisory firm. And so they advise investors how to vote in their proxy statements, and their report includes a section on cybersecurity and uses our metrics in that section as well. So there are these other groups who are using who are interested in cyber governance and are using the metrics in our tool to do so.
That's really interesting. It reminds me of other conversations that I've had about cyber governance and compliance and people having to fill out huge surveys, where you've got to go and check things. And it seems like the substituting that with a BitSight style tool where it's just scanning for these things automatically, and almost eliminating the need for a lot of these questions would be more efficient, both for the potential customer of, like, say, a cyber insurer, and for the cyber insurance company, where they actually have evidence rather than somebody filling out a questionnaire. Is that something that you've seen, that people have been replacing questionnaires with your tool?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you people are replacing questionnaires. I think, I hope one day they will. I think in reality, there are things in the questionnaire around process and so forth that we're not going to get to in the external collection.
Right.
What we do see is people reducing their questionnaires, focusing the questionnaires on the things that they need to focus on. And so that's like we think we can externally measure these things. We'll focus our questionnaire on these other things which we can't measure externally. The other thing we see is people kind of triaging their vendors for levels of questionnaires based on their BitSite rating. And so, if a company has achieved a high enough rating, they get an abbreviated questionnaire. Like we're pretty comfortable with the security. We've got to ask a few questions, but here's a few questions. If you have a lower rating, you got a more extensive questionnaire. So we do see, movement on the edges, but still there's a lot of, that's a well ingrained system.
Gotcha. Another question here comes from Lala, who's wondering, how does BitSite's security performance management work, and how does it perform vulnerability discovery across a range of endpoint servers, devices, and mobile apps?
Yeah, great question. So our security performance management is what we call the application that you use to look at your own security. So we talked a lot about third-party risk. We have an application focused on vendors and third-party risk. We have an application focused on security performance management. That's where you do the external attack surface management and so forth. And so I'm not sure I mentioned that, but Lala clearly is familiar, which is great. So within that application, we have all the different types of data. The vulnerability assessments are done in a couple of different ways. The server, anything that's an internet-facing server, is collected by our GROMA scanner. So we have a range of confidence levels around vulnerabilities. So the kind of lowest confidence level is, we see the software that is vulnerable to this this CVE, like as a victim of the CVE running on this machine. We can't, so we will flag that as possibly vulnerable. We don't know the version of the software. We don't know whether it's been patched. But if you're looking at a list of 1,000 vendors and trying to understand who might have this problem, it's a useful data point to kind of like triage the way down. That goes all the way up to there are some vulnerabilities that we can test for actively. So we can do a non-invasive check and say, oh yes, the behavior of this server is such that we know that this problem isn't resolved. And so that we call a confirmed vulnerability, and we can track the status of those over time. That's on the server side. On the endpoint and mobile device side, on the endpoint side, our detection is mostly around browser and operating system versions. And so what's the version of the operating system in place? Are you using the latest versions of the browser and operating system? That's true for desktop and mobile devices. We do have a special analysis of mobile applications, and so we are able to assess mobile applications that are posted to the app stores using a range of dynamic security testing techniques to discover different things about how encryption is handled, some security things that are visible on the device, and that's how we do the mobile applications.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and thanks Lala, for that question. So, Brian, that's probably a good place to leave it. I could ask you questions about this all day. I love this topic of this technology. But just maybe as sort of a final question, if people want to get started with BitSite or find out more, any recommendations for them?
Yeah, come and talk to us. Look at this ebook that's right available here for you. I think that's a good summary of a lot of what we do. Come to our website. You can get from our website your rating information. That's always a good starting place, whether you're interested in third party or first party. Come to the website, get the information, and we're happy to talk. Okay.
Well, Brian Mulligan, thank you so much for being here. It's been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time and all your insights here.
Thank you, Scott. It's great to be here.
All right. And we're going to let Brian go there and get on to our final piece of business here, which is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card is Carlton Riddick from Georgia. So congratulations to Carlton Riddick. We'll be in touch to get you your card. Last chance to grab that ebook out of your handout section. And we're going to wrap up here. So on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank BitSite for making this event possible. Thanks again to Brian for a great conversation. And thanks always for attending and for the great questions that you guys submitted. That's going to conclude today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.